Panthers GM Dan Morgan said last week at the Combine, while they have obvious needs on the defensive side of the ball, that he would not neglect the offense this offseason. Which areas may the Panthers address during free agency? We'll talk about that right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, where on Fridays, I answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on the show. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council, or at me over on Blue Sky, also at Julian Council, to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. And we are 1 week away from the official beginning of the new league year in the NFL, and the official beginning of free agency, as next week on March 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern time, the new league year will begin for the NFL. And the Panthers by now would have had 2 days of the legal negotiating period. And from some of the reports that I've read and some of the people I've talked to, they're going to be pretty aggressive about going out there and adding to the defense. But that does not mean that they're not going to add to the offense as well this time next week and throughout the course of free agency and the rest of the offseason heading into the 2025 NFL draft up in Green Bay. And speaking of the offense, Dan Morgan, the Panthers general manager and president of football operations, did say last week at the Combine up in Indianapolis, while they have obvious needs on the defensive side of the ball, which we talked about yesterday on the show, he was not going to neglect the offensive side of the ball during free agency, during the draft, throughout the entirety of this offseason, which is the right approach. The Panthers are in a rare time where they have stability at the quarterback position. When's the last time they've had this level of stability at quarterback? Going back to when they had Cam Newton, who was the last quarterback here in Carolina to start 3 straight season openers, as he did in 2017, 2018, and in 2019. Now Bryce Young is set to do that. Of course, knock on wood, don't want anything bad to happen to Bryce in between now and the opener in September. And why even put that out there in the universe, Julian? My bad to all y'all out there watching and listening to the show. But Bryce Young is going to be the starting quarterback. And you back to last season, there was a lot of questions about whether he could play. You saw what C.J. Stroud did, and people were saying the Panthers drafted the wrong quarterback. And certainly Stroud has had success in Houston. They won the division 2 straight times, and also a weak Southern division in the NFL, winning the AFC South. This is a wide open NFC South coming up here this upcoming season. So certainly Carolina could potentially win a division, provided that they add to the defensive side of the ball and they fill those obvious needs, and that they do not neglect the offense like Dan Morgan is talking about. But you have your quarterback now for this upcoming season. He grew in confidence. You grew in confidence in him and what he was able to do in the final 9 games of the year. Don't ignore the fact that they still need playmakers on this roster. And the number one spot I'm looking at is at wide receiver. And I understand that the Panthers wide receiver room is in a far better place this offseason than it was last offseason. It's kind of akin to where they put themselves last offseason, where they didn't have any edge rushers. After Yetur Gross-Matos left in free agency, they traded away Brian Burns. Frankie Luvu decided to take less money to go to Washington. They didn't have an edge rushing group, but they didn't put themselves in a great position because they traded away Brian Burns. The scheme necessarily didn't fit what Frankie Luvu wanted to see, and they didn't get Yetur Gross-Matos. It's not like he did a lot in San Francisco this past season, but even before that, you look at the receiver market that was out there in free agency, it wasn't great, and still, they traded away DJ Moore in an effort to get up number 1 to take Bryce Young. Last year, they had to go out there and be aggressive offensively across the board, but especially at receiver, and they did that by drafting Xavier Legette in the first round, trading up to do so, getting Jalen Coker as an undrafted free agent at a Holy Cross, and being able to bring in Deontay Johnson via trade. It did not work out, but okay, whatever. They at least tried to do it. David Moore, they brought in as free agent, and he actually turned out to be a pleasant surprise. And I think he's somebody that's worth bringing back in 2025. But I look at the receiver room. I like Thielen. I like Coker. I like Legette and the potential that those two second-year players have here in Carolina, but I don't see an alpha. I don't see anyone who scares anyone at this point in time in their career. Once upon a time, Adam Thielen scared a hell of a lot of defensive coordinators and players in the NFL. Now, in 2025, at age 35, not so much. Xavier Legette, if healthy with the foot and the wrist, that could be the case moving forward. But so far, no. And Jalen Coker, same case, not there yet. I would love to see them get a wide receiver one. And Dan Morgan was asked about that last week at the Combine, saying, quote, I love our wide receiver room. I think with Thielen, with Coker, with Xavier, we have some guys in that room that we're really excited about. We have a young core of guys that are still developing from a fundamental standpoint, from a route running standpoint. It would be nice to find as many playmakers as possible. If we pinpoint a guy, whether in free agency or in the draft, then we wouldn't hesitate to either draft or sign one. Speed is definitely a factor when you talk about any position. You want to be fast, you want to be physical. So yeah, that is a point of emphasis as well when looking at the wide receiver position this offseason and heading to free agency next week. And of course, later on into the draft in late April up there in Green Bay. So looking at it, some names to know. And this is not an overwhelmingly talented wide receiver market. There's more names than guys who I think can really produce for a team heading into 2025 in the NFL. And the names I'm looking at are T. Higgins, who we'll talk about momentarily, Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, Marquise Brown, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, threw Diami Brown in there as well, and also Darius Slayton. So there are a lot of guys. Amari Cooper, I mentioned him as well. There's a lot of guys out there who you've heard of, who produced, that are available, and they could potentially help out this team. But focusing in on a couple of these names. T. Higgins came out in the news on Tuesday that he was going to be tagged for the second year in a row at a $26.2 million price tag. Only two players this cycle were placed on the franchise tag, him and Trey Smith. They were both tagged, the fewest number of players tagged since 1994. And there were 8 players given the franchise tag last year, including Brian Burns. And there have been at least 6 players tagged in each year going back to 2019. So a rare year where the Panthers, not the Panthers, but teams out there were just not willing to go out there and franchise tag some of their players. Dallas got a deal done with Oso Zigadua, so they didn't have to do that. The Miami Dolphins decided not to franchise tag Javon Holland. Same thing with the Vikings and Sam Darnold. So there were some players out there that could have been tagged, but their team decided, we're not going to do that. We're going to let you test the market and try to still work on a new deal. So T. Higgins was the guy I really wanted Carolina to go out there and to get. And it's still a possibility. Let's not look at the tag and think that it's not possible for them to trade for him. As we saw last year, when Brian Burns was tagged by Carolina, they continued talks, but clearly those weren't going anywhere, and the relationship was irreparable at that point in time, and they decided to move him to New York. Now they only got a second-round pick. There was a fifth-round pick swap, and they got another fifth-rounder. That's not a lot of compensation. So if you're telling me that's what Carolina received from the Giants for an edge rusher who was 25 and in the prime of his career at a premium position, I think more premium than a wide receiver, you can't potentially give up the same, if not less, to Cincinnati for T. Higgins. And of course, you would have to re-sign him. And that's the big part of it. If there's going to be a sign and trade kind of situation with the franchise tag, because you have to sign a guy like T. Higgins to a massive deal, that's going to bring down the compensation like we saw last year with the Giants and Carolina and the Brian Burns trade. So he's not a free agent, but that's still a situation that I'm monitoring. We've been doing that for like the last 2 years on the show, and we're not giving up until that ink is dry and he actually signs a long-term deal in Cincinnati. And quite honestly, I think the Bengals are going to get that done, but we'll see whether that happens or not, which means that Chris Godwin is now the top wide receiver on the market, and the guy that I would trust the most out of those names. Maybe Devontae Adams would be above him, but still, Chris Godwin, even though coming off of a significant injury, would be the top free agent wide receiver out there on the market at this moment in time. 50 receptions last season, 576 yards, 5 touchdowns in the 7 games that he played. That would have led the Panthers in receptions and receiving touchdowns. Well, actually, he would not let him receiving touchdowns, but it would have been second in yards. So he did that in 7 games. He was having a hell of a season last year for Tampa Bay before getting injured late in that Monday Night Football game. Prior to his injury, he had 3 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons. The Carolina Panthers absolutely could use somebody like that. And think about last year. We were talking about wide receivers. Could the Carolina Panthers, having hired Dave Canales from Tampa, could they woo Mike Evans to Carolina? Unfortunately, they couldn't get Evans, as the Bucs were determined to get that deal done and make him a Buck for life. Now they're going to try to do the same thing with Chris Godwin, I would think, with the relationship that he and Dave Canales had for that one season. I have not seen glowing reviews on video like we saw last year with Mike Evans talking about Dave Canales from Chris Godwin. And that's not to say that Chris Godwin and Dave Canales didn't mesh and that he doesn't feel highly about him, but I haven't seen any of those at least put out there on social media at this point in time. If they have been circling around, I've missed it, and at me over on Twitter or Blue Sky and send those over to me right after listening to the show, watching the show. But if you look at it, Jeremy Fowler was talking about this, ESPN.com, NFL Insider, saying if Chris Godwin gets to free agency, don't be surprised if the Patriots get involved, as they need to help out Drake May. But the Bucs have made Godwin a priority, and the feeling around the league is the team will make him a Buck for life. With T. Higgins expected to receive the franchise tag, which has happened, Godwin would be far and away the top free agent receiver. And that's saying far and away over even Devontae Adams. So Chris Godwin, top receiver out there, market value, according to Spot Track to place for contracts, 3 years, $65.5 million. $67.5 million, excuse me. Average annual salary, $22.5. That's just going to be the price of getting a receiver of his caliber. Of course, coming out that injury is concerning, but he has been a very productive receiver when he's been healthy. And hell, even last year before going down, he was very productive for Tampa Bay and well on his way to having a 4th straight 1,000-yard receiving season. So I would love to see Chris Godwin come up here to Carolina and stay within the division. Devontae Adams was released on Tuesday by the Jets. They saved like $29 million by doing this. So a no-brainer for the Jets. And Aaron Rodgers is no longer going to be around there in New York. So it makes sense that his buddy Devontae Adams also departed. 5 straight seasons, by the way, for Devontae Adams with 1,000 yards receiving and at least 8 touchdowns. The last Panthers receiver to put up those stats in a single season, meaning 1,000 yards receiving and 8 touchdowns, was Kelvin Benjamin back in 2014 during his rookie season. That's how long it's been since the Panthers had a receiver put up those kind of stats. Certainly DJ Moore, and I'm talking about wide receiver. Even Greg Olsen didn't do that, but wide receiver. They've had DJ Moore who put up good numbers, but never had the touchdowns. I think the quarterback play was a big part of that, of course, but they have not had a receiver have those kind of numbers. And that's something that Devontae Adams has done consistently, which is why he's been one of the top receivers in the league and one of the top compensated receivers in the league. And we'll see what his Hall of Fame candidacy will be once his career is over. Looking at the market value, not crazy. 2 years, $27.1 million, average annual salary of $13.5. I would be interested. I had somebody ask me over on Twitter at Julian Council in my DMs on Tuesday whether this would make sense for Carolina. And they did question whether he would be a locker room fit. You know, things in Las Vegas when Carolina's playing against them week 3, it wasn't great. It wasn't a rosy scene. He eventually forced his way out of there, went to New York, and even up there, it seemed like there was some kind of issue. So knowing that Dave Canales is such a culture guy, I don't know. But they need to upgrade the talent level for sure, and Devontae Adams would do that by being added to this receiver room this offseason. Marquise Hollywood Brown, we talked about him a lot last year as the Panthers need to add not just receivers, but like receiving speed to the offense, and he would have made sense. Instead, he signed in Kansas City, and he was only able to play in 2 regular season games and in all 3 of their playoff games, including the Super Bowl this past season. Only had 14 receptions, 131 yards, and 0 touchdowns. Wasn't healthy. And I still think he's a guy that you could probably get for a reasonable deal, and he could add some speed to the offense. So someone worth looking at. Darius Slayton is another name out there. I saw Matt Bowen of ESPN.com. We talked about him yesterday. He put out an article, I think a couple weeks ago on .com talking about some of the free agents available and their team fits. And he had Trevon Moehrig, the safety from the Raiders, as a fit here in Carolina. Also had Darius Slayton as a fit for Carolina at the wide receiver position, saying this: the Panthers wide receivers averaged 11.0 yards per catch last season, 30th in the NFL. Slayton caught 39 passes and averaged 14.2 yards per reception in 2024, despite subpar quarterback play in New York. So Carolina could use Slayton to boost the pass game around quarterback Bryce Young. Slayton is a veteran who can stretch the field from perimeter alignments and make contested catches. And that's certainly something that Carolina is looking for, as we didn't really have anybody here in Carolina last year. The team didn't have anybody who was able, a little wee slip there, who was able to stretch the field and help out the team. We talked about this with Mike Kay, that Carolina likely was not going to be in the market for one of these top tier free agent wide receivers, even though I look at it, okay, sure, Amari Cooper, that's a name that we've heard. Keenan Allen's been a big name throughout the years. Stephon Diggs. I don't know if any of those guys, somebody that Carolina wants at this point in time in their career. Adams could be, Chris Godwin certainly could be, T. Higgins, I would think should be a guy they would want, but they probably would be in that second tier. That's what Mike was saying, and Darius Slayton would fit into that, and he's probably somebody they could get. So that's a name to look at. Those are the names. And I'm also going to throw out Diami Brown. Played in Washington the last 4 years, was really impressive at the end of his tenure up there in D.C. as he had a big close of the season in the playoffs, and maybe the light bulb's finally gone off for him. Very curious to see what his market's going to be this offseason. He is a Charlotte guy, having played at West Mac High and, of course, at North Carolina. So that's just a name to look out for at wide receiver. But I do think, even with Thielen, with Leggett, and with Coker, the Panthers need to be trying to give Bryce Young more weapons to continue to elevate what he can do. He showed you that you can win with him, and he certainly showed you, even at times against Atlanta, that you can win because of him. Give him more weapons, continue to help out Bryce Young, and do not neglect the offensive playmakers and skill positions. That's what Dan Morgan said. So we'll see if he puts that into practice coming up next week and beyond. But it's not just wide receiver that needs to be addressed as far as pass catchers go. Tight end is right now a very thin room. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet health care, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food and treats to toys, beds, and grooming. And it's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets too. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth, vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. Auto Ship is a game changer. You can set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so you never run out, so you can easily change or cancel it anytime. I don't know about you. If you have a pet out there, anytime you bring a box into the house, they're always sniffing around, and my cat Grover is always sniffing around. He knows it's Chewy, and he knows that he's about to get it some treats and get some more food, because that's the thing he loves more in life is food. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. The Panthers finally have stability at the quarterback position heading into the 2025 season, as Bryce Young proved over the final 9 weeks that he indeed is the guy for 2025. And we'll see likely beyond past this upcoming season. And because they have the quarterback stability and they have the offensive line, they should not stop going out there and getting skilled players. I think they should add to the wide receiver position. And certainly the Panthers need to add to the tight end position, as Dan Morgan spoke to the media last week up in Indianapolis at the annual NFL Scouting Combine, saying, quote, "Our tight end room is pretty thin. Tighter room right now. Jadavion Sanders is a frontline guy right now. That is an area that we need to address, whether in free agency or draft or both." And I am of the opinion that it probably should be both. I like a lot of the tight ends coming out in this draft class. When you look, of course, at Tyler Warren out of Penn State, Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green, he would make a lot of sense. Colston Loveland out of Michigan, Gunnar Helm, who replaced Jatavion Sanders this past year at Texas and was kind of a surprise. There's a guy, Amari Niblack, who transferred to Alabama, who they thought was going to be the top tight end. Nope. Gunnar Helm ended up being probably the most reliable pass catcher on that Texas Longhorns team this past season. Any Texas fans out there, I know a couple of you listen to the show. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but we all watched what he was able to do this past season. So there are some names out there in the draft that I would love to see come to Carolina. but they still got to get a vet. And some names to know as far as veterans out there that are free agents: Tyler Conklin, Juwan Johnson, Gerald Everett, and Tommy Trimble. We'll get to him at the last part of this conversation. But Tyler Conklin, probably, arguably, either him or Juwan Johnson, the top available tight end on the market this offseason. The last 4 years up in New York and in 1 year in Minnesota. His final year in Minnesota, that would be 231 receptions, 2,215 yards, 10 touchdowns. That is excellent production, and the kind of production that the Carolina Panthers tight ends haven't even put together over the last 4 years. So certainly he would be somebody that could add to that. And Dave Canales said they don't just want a pass catcher. They don't want just like a run blocker. They want somebody who can provide versatility to that position group. And we did see JT Sanders do that, especially towards that middle part of the season where he was starting to come on before that neck injury suffered in that home loss against Kansas City. He was really good as a pass catcher, going up there and catching the ball and being one of those 50-50 kind of deals. And it also was improving as a run blocker. And that was one of the concerns about him when he was drafted, probably a reason why it took him to the 4th round for him to be coming off the board in the NFL draft last April. But still, that is somebody that they like and somebody that's going to play a key role. But they got to add more to that group, as it has been one of the worst tight end groups over the last 5-6 years since Greg Olsen departed Carolina for Seattle, then to the TB booth up in Fox. Market value for Tyler Conklin, 3 years, $27 million, $9 million average annual salary. Not crazy at all if that's what they want to do. Pretty similar to what they gave Hayden Hurst a couple years ago, which, of course, that deal did not work out. Juwan Johnson could potentially stay within the division if Carolina's interested. Had a career year this past season in 2024 with the Saints with 50 receptions, 548 yards, and 3 touchdowns. His market value is a little higher than what they have out there for Tyler Conklin on Spot Track. 3 years, $30 million. Of course, average annual salary of just a clean $10 million would make sense again. Guy who can be versatile, can pass block, can run block. I would love to see Juwan Johnson come here to Carolina. Gerald Everett has ties to some members of this staff. You look at Carolina Panthers tight end coach, whose name's escaped me, of course, at this point in time. He worked with Gerald Everett back in 2021 with the Seahawks, where he had 48 receptions, 478 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Now, you look at his past season with the Bears, not impressive at all. Only 8 receptions, 36 yards, a goose egg when it came to touchdowns. Was not a key focal point of the offense. Banged up a little bit. Still could make sense they want to bring in a veteran, and if not able to go out there and get a Conklin or get a Juwan Johnson or any of the top guys out there on the market. Now, Tommy Trimble, Dan Morgan talked about him last week, saying, quote, Tommy's a guy who we would like to get back. We're going to let him test the market. So Tommy Trimble, don't imagine he's going to be one of the first tight ends off the board. Maybe he will be because he has played a significant amount of snaps through the course of his first 4 years in the NFL, all here in Carolina. We'll see what happens there, but his market value suggests, and of course, this is just a projection of what he could make, not saying exactly what teams are going to give him. This is never the actual number a lot of the times. But as far as the market value goes, 2 years, and maybe not never, but I've seen plenty of times where guys have gotten more or less. It's just a ballpark number of what they potentially could get and how Spot Track looks at it. But 2 years, $11.5 million is market value, average annual salary of 5.7. And if you want to compare that to what the Panthers gave Ian Thomas 3 years ago, they signed Ian Thomas to a 3-year, $16.95 million deal. So you add another year, and then you add that 5.7, and we're looking at, 17 mil? So right around what they gave Ian Thomas a couple of years ago here in Carolina. So that's not a crazy deal at all. I do not want to say that Tommy Trimble's value should be the same value that Ian Thomas had for this franchise when they erroneously went out there and extended him a couple of years ago. But that would be a very, very nice deal. They can sign that, maybe give him 3 years, 20, but that's not really a pass catcher. Now, he's not going to be your top tight end. So that kind of would be his value, as he only really can serve you for the most part as a run blocker and then a secondary pass catcher. Certainly not one of the guys that you really want to see going out there and collecting a lot of passes in a given season. But he has shown the last couple of seasons in particular that he's a little bit more than what he had been early on in his career. So Tommy Trimble would love to see him come back, but of course, at the right price. Carolina kind of with the same mindset as far as Dan Morgan goes. They're going to let him test the market, so we'll see. So Gerald Everett, Juwan Johnson, Tyler Conklin, of course, our guy already here in Carolina, Tommy Trimble, and maybe Ian Thomas, but I doubt it. Those are some of the names that you need to know as far as tight end goes. Center, and a running back. Those are two spots that should also be addressed. Talk about where the Panthers could go with those positions in offseason or in the free agency next week in just a moment here on Locked On Panthers. Taking a look at the other positions that Carolina could address offensively and looking at it right now, quarterback, they're set there. They have Bryce Young. They got Andy Dalton under contract for 2 more years as QB2 and also a mentor to Bryson for at least one game, especially if it's in week 3, a very reliable backup if you need him to go out there and play for you. And looking also at running back, they're going to need to add. We'll talk about that momentarily. But Chuba Hubbard's coming back. Receiver, I would like to see them add, but they're good as far as the top 3 guys right now. As far as that's all they had, I wouldn't think that they'd be in the worst position, but you'd certainly like to get better, and experience will help improve guys like Coker and like Leggett as well. But Leggett going to miss a lot of time this offseason, so you wonder what his growth will truly be if he's going to miss some time there during OTAs and maybe even possibly mandatory minicamp. But the Panthers also going to figure out what they're going to do on the offensive line. Left tackle, Wiki Ikwonu, questions there about the 5th-year option. We're seeing some talk last week that maybe it's not as set in stone, but Dan Morgan did say that they're going to do that. So I can go back to that quote maybe on another show when we talk more about that down the road. But Wiki Ikwonu going to be back. And I think what the conversation was that they may extend him instead of giving him the 5th-year option, which actually probably more beneficial to the Panthers to do that, to get ahead of things and not to pay him a gaudy number. Because I don't know necessarily if the 5th-year option that they'd be giving him is equal to what he's produced so far in his 3 seasons in Carolina. Either way, Ikwonu sticking around. Robert Hunt, Damian Lewis are back for another year. Taylor Moton, whether he's extended or they just keep it right there as far as the $31 million cap hit, he's going to be back. It's now comes down to what are they going to do at center. And when you look at it, Dan Morgan talked about it last week at the Combine, saying myself and Brant Tillis are talking to the agents of both guys, that being Cade Mays and Austin Corbett. We're working on things right now, trying to get things hammered out and get them back as Carolina Panthers. And that makes me think that they want to get both Austin Corbett and Cade Mays back, which would be a great thing because you need to have depth. And if you can bring back those 2 guys who started at center last year, also have Yosh Nijman and Chandler Zavala as backups, that's a very strong top 8 of your offensive line, and you're feeling really good about what you can do up front again in the run game, but also protecting your quarterback, which has been a bugaboo for the Panthers over the course of the years in recent times. Having those guys back, having depth, and be able to withstand injuries like they did this past season, would love to see that be the case for this team in 2025 once again. And Corbett had an interesting interaction on Twitter on Friday, as there was a headline. Somebody put this out there on Twitter. Some Panther fan got an ESPN alert that said center Austin Corbett wants to play for a team where there isn't competition for the position. Now, the original ESPN article, this is the headline: 32 NFL players who need a change of scenery this offseason. So the headline that ESPN put out there is certainly different than the alert. Now, the alert does play off of what was said in that article, and David Newton of ESPN.com. I know Panther fans feel a type of way about David Newton, but I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to say anything negatively about any of my colleagues out there covering this team. He works hard and maybe don't like some of the things that he does, but David Newton went out there and said, quote, Corbett has been limited to 9 starts past 2 seasons because of injuries. He wants to play for a team where there really isn't a competition for the position. That's now happening at Carolina, where Cade Mays is a younger and less expensive version who did a solid job replacing Corbett this past season. For a team in a rebuild mode, it just makes sense to spend money elsewhere. Now, here's the issue. Because when I read that, he says he wants to play for a team where there really isn't a competition for the position. At no point when we have heard from Austin Corbett since the offseason has he said plainly that he does not want to come back to Carolina if it's going to be a competition. He understands that he's only played 9 games past 2 seasons, and that wherever he goes, he's going to likely have to compete for a spot to start, especially if he's going to stay here in Carolina. He wants to be here. He has said that. And Corbett went out there on Twitter and quote tweeted the ESPN alert that was put out there by that Panther fan, saying David Newton claims he needs to be in the locker room when we're getting out of practice /showers and know us on a personal level and share our stories, which alludes to some of the concerns that reporters have had as after the pandemic, there were some concerns whether they ever go back in the locker room to be able to tell some of the stories of the players, get to know them on a personal level. And I do think there's value. You may not think so. That's totally fine. You've never done the job. So how the hell would you know? But let me tell you, if there's something critical for your job to be better at, then maybe you wouldn't want that eliminated. But a lot of people don't care. Yet, after 3 years together, he doesn't know a thing about me. That's how Austin Corbett finished things off. I don't know what the deal is of Austin Corbett and David Newton and their relationship. I mean, I've sat in those press conferences. I've certainly seen some of the way that Austin Corbett has reacted to questions that have been put out there by individuals. Not to name anybody, but yeah, everyone gets a look every once in a while. I do think he's somebody who wants to be here. He has said as much. I have not heard anybody out there say that he does not want to come back to Carolina if there's competition. That was certainly news to me when I read that, and I was a little caught off guard. Now, had that not been put in there, saying that he's been limited to only 9 starts past 2 seasons because of injuries, and that Cade Mays is a younger and less expensive version who did a solid job of replacing him, and for a team in a rebuild, it makes sense to spend money elsewhere. Like, if he would have just said that, no harm, no foul. But to basically put words in his mouth, it seems like that's where Corbett had the issue. So that was something I saw last week, just want to address. But yeah, I mean, David works hard, and, we all get things wrong, and maybe he got that wrong. I don't know. But Austin Corbett, Cade Mays, would like to see both those guys back, and I think that Carolina can get that done. As far as the restricted free agency issue there, as far as Cade Mays goes, I have not seen a tender placed out there that could be $3 million. Sounds like they may even want to give him a longer extension potentially, as he was under his rookie contract and Carolina got rid of him in the whole situation of going to the Giants and coming over here again. We'll see how that plays out, but I would think that Cade Mays would be the favorite and probably is the better one to go with at this point in time in his career than Austin Corbett, but both those coming back, that would make a lot of sense for Carolina. Now, speaking of injuries and needing some help at a position, running back, Chuba Hubbard coming back off of a career year was excellent for Carolina, having 1,000 yards rushing, getting that 4-year deal, or was it 3-year or 4-year? 4-year deal, right? Getting extended that way. And then coming out in Munich right after that and having the best game of his career. He's going to be back as RB1 in Carolina for the, I guess, 2.5 season. He won the job midway through 2023. Then, of course, went into last year with the job. But running back, they got to find a backup. We have not seen any news on Miles Sanders. At least I've been recording this late here on Tuesday evening. I have not seen any news that has suggested Miles Sanders is going to come back to Carolina, whether it be a restructured deal or whatever it's going to be. I would like to see it happen, as he showed his value in that week 18 game. You even saw the value in week 17 when Chuba was out with a calf injury for the rest of the year. And then also Miles Sanders was still not back yet. Jonathan Brooks was out for the year with the torn ACL. Some situations to monitor there. As far as Brooks, they're not putting a timeline. And it may be the entire season. We may not see him again until 2026. We were talking to Damian Parson last week of Locked On NFL Draft, and he was saying the Panthers should draft another running back. And that's tough to hear. I don't know if they're going to do that. They may give him some time, that being Jonathan Brooks, but we'll see. Some names to know as far as running back goes. Jamal Williams was cut by the Saints, so he's available. Raheem Mostert was another cap casualty down there in Miami. He could make some sense. Alexander Madison has been better as a backup than someone as a starter when he was backing up Dalvin Cook for all those years up in Minnesota. Javonte Williams, local guy, could make some sense for Carolina. So those are some names. Chase Edmonds also was in Tampa with Dave Canales. I've seen DJ Dallas, who was in Seattle with these guys. Those are some names to know, but they need to go out there, get a veteran backup if Miles Sanders is not able to stay in Carolina. And hell, maybe they want to go out there and draft somebody as well. But that's a look at some of the offensive priorities heading into free agency for Carolina over at wide receiver, at tight end, center, and over also at running back. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show free over on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, and also on Blue Sky at Julian Council, where on Fridays I'm here answering your weekly Friday mailbag question. All you got to do is either at me or DM me on Twitter and at me or on Blue Sky to get those questions in for Friday's show. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding in. I'll talk to y'all on Thursday, where I'm thinking we're going to get some news to talk about this Panthers team and what's going on heading to free agency. So talk to y'all on Thursday.